The steak on the plate was untouched. Crystal glasses sparkled under warm lighting, but Richard Callahan didn't notice. He sat motionless in his tailored suit, eyes locked on something far away, something no one else could see. Then, without a word, a little girl passed his table, paused, and slid a folded napkin next to his hand. He opened it, and for the first time in years, he cried. He didn't even know her name, just a few crooked letters on a napkin, and somehow they cracked open a grief he had spent years trying to silence. Richard Callahan wasn't just a wealthy man. He was the kind of man who had everything money could buy, and nothing that truly mattered anymore. That night, at a high-end restaurant he'd visited countless times before, something changed. A stranger's child saw a sadness that the world ignored, and in a single innocent sentence she offered him something no fortune ever had: understanding. This is not a story about money. It's about memory, about the invisible wounds we carry, about how a man with a broken heart found a piece of his soul again, when he least expected it. Stay with me, because sometimes the smallest voice holds the truth we're most afraid to hear. He wasn't always like this. There was a time when Richard Callahan's presence would light up a room, not because of his fortune, but because of his fire. A man who built a tech empire from scratch, who turned setbacks into strategy, who outworked, outthought, outpaced everyone around him. But that fire had long since gone cold. Every morning he followed the same sterile routine: wake up in his penthouse overlooking Manhattan, gym, black coffee, car waiting downstairs, meetings stacked one after another, handled with robotic precision. His voice, once commanding, now rarely rose above a whisper. His eyes, sharp as ever, were dulled by something deeper than fatigue. His staff admired him. Investors respected him, but no one really knew him. That afternoon, his personal assistant reminded him of a date no one else dared mention. "Mr. Callahan, I noticed the calendar. Do you want me to cancel your reservation tonight?" He paused. A long silence filled the office. "No," he said finally, his voice flat. "Same place, same time." It was the 5th anniversary of Ethan's death. He didn't need a reminder. That date had been burned into every cell of his body. His son, Ethan Callahan, had been 10 years old when he died. Bright, curious, obsessively into space and rockets. He used to sit at the window waiting for his dad to come home. But more often than not, Richard was working late, traveling, growing the company for Ethan's future. Now there was no future. No Ethan, only silence. Richard had never spoken publicly about the loss. Not once, even with close friends, or what few remained. He kept it locked away. He had become a man of glass, intact on the outside, shattered within. That evening, like he did every year, he sat alone at La Bernier, a restaurant Ethan once said smelled like clouds. He always ordered the same meal: steak, medium rare, mashed potatoes with extra butter, Ethan's favorite. And as families laughed and toasted around him, Richard sat motionless, untouched by the warmth, until a little girl, Lily, appeared at his table, and did the one thing no adult had dared to do in 5 years. She saw him, not the billionaire, not the cold executive, just a man drowning quietly in his own grief. But to understand why that moment shattered something inside Richard, you need to know what he lost. Ethan Callahan wasn't just his son, he was Richard's reason, the one thing in his life that wasn't calculated, negotiated, or optimized. When Ethan was born, Richard was already deep into building Callahan dynamics. He promised himself he'd do it all for Ethan. Every late night, every boardroom battle, every billion made, he told himself it would all be worth it. Ethan, however, didn't want more things. He wanted time. He wanted a dad who could stay through an entire movie without checking emails, who would come to science fairs, who would listen to him talk about the phases of the moon like it mattered. And Richard tried. He really did. But trying wasn't the same as being there. There was one weekend that haunted him more than any other. Ethan had invited him to a school space camp open house. He'd drawn a little poster that read, "My dad is the smartest person in the universe." Richard promised he'd be there. He even cleared his schedule. But on that morning, a last-minute investor flew in from Tokyo. Richard blinked. And just like that, the decision was made. He never saw the poster. And 3 weeks later, Ethan was gone. A rare neurological condition, sudden, aggressive. Within days, their world collapsed. Richard did everything he knew how to do. He found the best doctors, moved him to the best hospital, pulled every string money could touch. But none of it mattered. On Ethan's last night, he was half-conscious. Richard sat beside him, holding his small hand, whispering promises. "I'll stop working, I'll be better, I'll do it right this time." But Ethan was too far away to answer. The last real words they exchanged had been an argument. Ethan, frustrated and teary-eyed, had shouted, "You care more about your phone than me." Richard had raised his voice, said something he'd never forgive himself for. "Everything I do is for you, and you don't even see it." Now Ethan was gone, and Richard lived in a glass tower built on guilt. That's why the napkin shattered him. Because for the first time in years, someone looked past the suit, past the power, and saw only the pain. And in a child's handwriting, a door he thought was sealed forever began to crack open. The paper felt rough between his fingers. It was folded unevenly, smudged a little by a jelly-stained thumb. He unfolded it slowly, almost as if afraid of what he'd find inside. The handwriting was clumsy, the letters uneven, but clear enough. "You look sad. My daddy says sadness is love that doesn't know where to go. I think you miss someone." "That's okay. I miss people too, Lily." Richard stared at it. Then something inside him buckled. His shoulders sank, his jaw tightened, his breath caught halfway. And then, silently, the tears came. It was the kind of cry that doesn't ask permission. It didn't roar. It collapsed, quiet, deep and uncontrollable. Years of silence and restraint breaking apart with one sentence written in crayon. Around him, waiters moved quietly. No one said a word. The chatter from nearby tables blurred into background noise. Glasses clinked. Silverware scraped. Laughter echoed softly. But inside Richard, everything went still. He pressed the napkin to his chest, like it might disappear if he let go. For a brief second, he looked around, searching for the girl. But she was gone. Only the napkin remained. An echo of something he hadn't let himself feel in half a decade. Connection. And then, just as quickly, the old reflexes returned. He wiped his face, stood up, buttoned his suit jacket, left a generous tip, and walked out. On the ride home, he didn't speak. His driver noticed the silence was heavier than usual, but didn't ask. Inside the penthouse, Richard poured himself a drink. Sat on the edge of his bed. The city lights blinked through the windows, indifferent to the man who sat staring at nothing. He opened the drawer on his nightstand. Inside it were 5 things: a tiny plastic rocket, a drawing of Saturn with a stick figure labeled "Me and Dad," a movie stub from Interstellar, a hospital bracelet, and the eulogy he never gave. He pulled out the drawing and placed the napkin beside it. 2 small pieces of paper, one from the boy he couldn't save, and one from a girl he didn't know. He tried to sleep that night, but his dreams were different. In one, Ethan stood on a hill pointing to the stars. "They're still there, Dad," he said. "You just stopped looking up." Richard woke up gasping. It was 3:12 a.m. He sat in the kitchen, lights off, clutching the napkin. And in that moment something shifted. It wasn't peace, it wasn't healing, it was ache. But this time, he didn't run from it. He let it in. He whispered out loud for the first time in years, "I miss you, buddy. I miss you so damn much." And you? Have you ever carried a grief so silent that no one even knew it was there, until something cracked it open? Maybe it was a song, a scent, A sentence from a stranger. If you've ever felt that invisible ache, share your story in the comments. You never know. Your words might be the napkin someone else is waiting to read. The next morning, Richard didn't follow his usual routine. He didn't go to the gym. He didn't check his calendar. He didn't respond to the dozens of emails piling up on his phone. Instead, he walked over to the small cabinet in the living room, the one he hadn't opened in years. It held the only physical memories he had left of Ethan: drawings, science books, a broken model of the solar system, and one small voice recorder they used to play with on car rides. Ethan would pretend he was a NASA commander, logging space missions from the back seat. Richard picked it up and pressed play. A young voice crackled through the static. Mission log 17. Dad brought snacks this time. Maybe he's learning. Laughter. End log. He sat down, completely still, holding the recorder like it was something alive. And that's when it happened. Something quiet, almost imperceptible. Not a revelation, not forgiveness, just a flicker. He remembered a night years ago when Ethan had fallen asleep in the back seat after a movie. Richard had carried him inside, tucked him in, and just watched him breathe for a while. That moment had felt more real than any boardroom triumph or stock market win. Back then, he thought he'd have more time. Now all he had were fragments. But maybe, just maybe, fragments could still become something. That thought wouldn't have crossed his mind before Lily. Before that napkin, before someone reminded him that sadness is love with nowhere to go. Maybe it was time to give his love somewhere to go. The thought lingered. That afternoon, Richard did something he hadn't done since Ethan died. He returned to his son's old school. The receptionist didn't recognize him at first, but when he gave his name, her eyes softened. "You're Ethan's father," she said, almost in a whisper. "He was special." She brought him to see Ms. Clara, Ethan's third-grade teacher. The room hadn't changed much. Same alphabet posters, same faded globe. But to Richard, it felt like another lifetime. They sat across from each other. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "I never came to parent-teacher nights," he said finally. "I always said I was too busy." Ms. Clara nodded gently. "He always said you were building rockets, that you were busy helping the world." That hit harder than anything else. Ethan had never stopped defending him, even when he didn't deserve it. She reached into a drawer and handed him a crumpled piece of paper. "He made this during class one day. I kept it for some reason. Maybe I knew one day you'd need it." It was a simple sketch, a stick-figure dad holding hands with a boy under a sky full of stars. At the bottom, Ethan had written, "He's my hero, even when he's tired." Richard stared at it for a long time. Then something in him opened. Not completely, but enough. When he left the school, the world felt louder, more textured. He noticed the sound of kids laughing outside, the way sunlight fell between buildings, details he'd forgotten how to see. At home that night, he sat in front of a blank notebook, and for the first time in 5 years he wrote. Not emails, not numbers. He wrote a letter to Ethan. It wasn't polished, it wasn't perfect, but it was honest. "I miss your laugh. I miss the way you corrected me about Saturn's rings. I miss who I was when I was with you." He didn't know what he would do next, but something had changed. He had started, but healing isn't a straight line. It loops. And so did Richard. The next few weeks were uneven. One day he'd wake up early, walk through Central Park, notice the birdsong. Another day he'd shut the curtains, ignore the world, and feel like he was drowning all over again. One morning, during a board meeting, someone pitched a new project, a healthcare AI for pediatric diagnostics. Normally, Richard would have evaluated the numbers, grilled the team, pushed for efficiency. This time, he just sat there, distant, quiet. Finally, he stood up mid-meeting. "I need to take some time," he said simply. "Effective immediately." There was silence, confused glances. A few people thought it was a breakdown, but it wasn't. It was a release. He didn't have a plan, just a napkin folded in his wallet and a question echoing inside him. What if I could help one kid like Ethan? That question led him to foundation offices, children's hospitals, research centers. He wasn't trying to fix his pain. He just wanted to give it purpose. But the past doesn't leave easily. One night he returned to La Bernier, the restaurant, hoping absurdly to see the girl again. He sat at the same table, ordered the same meal. It arrived just as untouched as always. She didn't come. No napkin, no miracle. And for a moment Richard felt foolish, desperate, like he'd made all of this up just to feel something again. The waiter approached with the check, and Richard shook his head. "Not yet," he said quietly. He stayed for another hour, watching families, listening, breathing, and then he smiled, because he realized something. It wasn't about seeing Lily again. It was about what she left behind, a sentence, a shift, a small, quiet truth. And Richard knew, somewhere out there, another child was carrying that same light. It was his turn to do the same. 3 months later, Richard stood in front of a modest crowd at the unveiling of the Ethan Callahan Foundation. He hadn't planned to speak, but when the time came, he walked up to the microphone with something folded in his hand, a napkin, worn from time, still legible. He looked out at the audience, doctors, parents, volunteers, a few confused reporters, and took a deep breath. "My son," he began, "died 5 years ago. I never said those words in public until today." The room went silent. "I spent years thinking I was honoring him by working harder, building more, becoming stronger. But what I was really doing was hiding." He held up the napkin. Then a little girl, who didn't know me, didn't owe me anything, slipped this onto my table at a restaurant. And these words, "Sadness is love that doesn't know where to go," unlocked something in me. He paused, "And now I know exactly where that love is going." There were tears in more eyes than his. The foundation, he explained, would fund early detection technologies for rare pediatric conditions like the one that took Ethan's life. It would also offer grief support to parents and children navigating the aftermath of loss, not in Richard's name, not in his company's, but in Ethan's, because that was the point, to let the love go somewhere it was needed. Later that day, walking out of the event hall, he felt lighter than he had in years, not healed, but human again. A year passed. On the anniversary of Ethan's death, Richard returned to La Bernier. Only this time, not out of habit or punishment, he ordered the same dish. This time, he took a bite, and then he saw her, Lily, a little taller now, but unmistakably the same bright soul. She walked in holding her father's hand. They were seated nearby, laughter already bubbling between them. Richard stood and walked over. "Excuse me," he said gently. "I think we've met before." Mark Thompson looked up, curious. Lily tilted her head, studying him. "You left me a note once," Richard said, unfolding the napkin from his wallet. Her eyes lit up. "That was you?" she asked quietly. He knelt down so he was eye level with her. "I never got to thank you." She smiled, shy but proud. "My daddy says sometimes we help people without knowing." Mark offered a warm handshake. "She's always had a way of seeing what others miss." Richard's voice caught slightly. "She helped me find someone I thought I lost forever." They talked for a while. About rockets, about stars, about love that stays even when someone leaves. And when Lily said goodbye, she gave him something else, a tiny sticker of Saturn. "Just in case you forget to look up," she said. Richard smiled. "I won't." And he meant it. From that day on, Richard carried more than just a folded napkin or a sticker of Saturn. He carried a different understanding of love, grief, and legacy. He still missed Ethan every day. That never changed, but the pain no longer controlled him. It had shape now, purpose, a voice. Through the foundation, he met dozens of families navigating impossible journeys. He didn't show up as a billionaire or a CEO. He showed up as a father, a man who'd learned, too late, but still in time, that love doesn't die when someone's gone. It just waits for a direction. Sometimes that direction is another child. Sometimes it's a cause. Sometimes it's a sentence written by a stranger. People began to ask him why he'd changed, why a man like him would suddenly open his life to others. And he would always smile gently and say the same thing, because one little girl reminded me that sadness is love that hasn't found its way home yet. Richard's journey shows us that sometimes it's in the quietest moments that we hear the loudest truths. A folded napkin, a child's honest words, a memory we tried to bury. They don't erase the pain, but they can point us back to what matters. And you? What moment cracked something open inside you? What small gesture helped you feel seen again? Share it in the comments. You never know who might be reading, who might need your story to feel a little less alone tonight. If this story moved you, leave a like. It helps more than you think. And if you believe in the power of stories that heal, that touch the soul, and remind us we're not broken, just human, subscribe to the channel. The next one might be the story you need to hear. Thank you for watching. And wherever you are tonight, don't forget to look up.